The dust kicked up around her boots as Jane Vickers stepped off the stagecoach in Jerome Junction, Arizona, her heart hammering against her ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the long journey from St. Louis. She had not set foot in this copper mining town for 12 years, not since the summer she turned 18 and left behind everything she knew, including the boy who had stolen her heart with his rough hands and gentle smile. Now 30 years old, widowed for 2 years and with nowhere else to turn, she had come back to the only place that had ever felt like home, even though the memories threatened to choke her with their sweetness and pain. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she gathered her 2 worn carpetbags, scanning the bustling main street with eyes that remembered every building, every corner where she and Matthew Brennan had stolen kisses when no one was looking. Her father had been the town doctor back then, and Matthew had been a ranch hand, the son of a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and a dream. When her father announced they were moving east to join her uncle's medical practice, he had forbidden her from seeing Matthew again, calling him worthless, a boy with no prospects who would drag her down into poverty. She had been young enough to believe her father knew best, foolish enough to think she could forget those blue eyes that looked at her like she was the only star in the sky. "Miss, you need help with those bags." A young boy, no more than 10, appeared at her elbow, eyeing her luggage hopefully. "No, thank you. I can manage." Jane forced a smile, though her hands trembled as she gripped the handles. She had saved every penny from selling her late husband's pharmacy in St. Louis, enough to start over, maybe open a small shop of her own. Charles had been a good man, kind and steady, but she had never loved him the way she had loved Matthew. She had tried, Lord knows she had tried, but some loves burn too bright to ever fully extinguish. The hotel stood where she remembered it, though it looked shabbier now, the paint peeling in the relentless Arizona heat. She walked slowly, drinking in the changes and the sameness of this place. The saloon had a new sign. The general store had expanded. But the mountains in the distance, those red rock formations that glowed like fire at sunset, those were exactly the same. She was halfway to the hotel when she saw him. Matthew Brennan stood outside the sheriff's office, a tin star pinned to his vest, his hat pushed back on his head as he spoke to an elderly woman clutching a basket. 12 years had changed him, added breadth to his shoulders and a hardness to his jaw that had not been there when he was 21, but Jane would have known him anywhere. Her feet stopped moving of their own accord, and one of her bags slipped from nerveless fingers, hitting the dirt with a soft thud. He looked up at the sound, and their eyes met across the dusty street. Time seemed to suspend itself, stretching thin like pulled taffy. Jane watched his expression shift from casual attention to confusion, then to recognition that hit him like a physical blow. His whole body went rigid, and the color drained from his sun-bronzed face. The elderly woman said something to him, but he did not appear to hear her. His gaze locked on Jane with an intensity that made her skin burn. Then he was moving, crossing the street with long strides that ate up the distance between them, leaving the bewildered woman behind. Jane could not breathe, could not think, could only stand frozen as he stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, the fine lines around his mouth, the way his chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. Jane. Her name came out rough, almost broken. Jane Vickers. "Hello, Matthew." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too high and too soft. "You are real." He reached out as if to touch her face, then caught himself, his hand falling back to his side. "I thought I was seeing things." "I have been seeing your face for 12 years in every crowd, every time a woman with dark hair walked past. But it was never you. The pain in his voice cut through her like a knife. I am real. I am here. Why? The single word held 1,000 questions, a dozen accusations, and beneath it all, a hope so fragile she could almost see it shimmer in the space between them. I had nowhere else to go. She bent to retrieve her fallen bag, grateful for the excuse to break that devastating eye contact. My husband died 2 years ago. I sold everything in St. Louis and thought maybe I could start fresh somewhere. This was the only place I could think of that ever felt like home. Your husband, Matthew's jaw tightened. You married him. That banker's son your father wanted for you. No. Charles was a pharmacist. I met him in St. Louis. He was a good man. She straightened, meeting his eyes again, refusing to be ashamed. He gave me a comfortable life. But did you love him? The question came out fierce, almost angry. Jane opened her mouth to lie, then found she could not. Not to him, not after everything. I cared for him. I respected him. He deserved better than what I could give him. Something in Matthew's expression cracked open, raw and vulnerable. And what was that? What could you not give him? My whole heart. The confession hung between them, honest and terrible. You took that with you 12 years ago, and I never got it back. Matthew made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a groan and a laugh. Jesus, Jane, you cannot just show up here after all this time and say things like that. You cannot waltz back into Jerome Junction and tell me you never stopped loving me when you are the one who left. When you are the one who got on that stagecoach and never looked back. I looked back. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away furiously. I looked back the whole way out of town until the dust swallowed everything. I wrote you letters I never sent. I dreamed about you so often Charles asked me whose name I was calling in my sleep. I was 18, Matthew. My father said you would ruin my life. I believed him because I did not know any better. And now, he stepped closer, so close she could smell leather and soap and something uniquely him that made her dizzy with memory. What do you believe now? That I made the biggest mistake of my life? Her voice broke. That I have been half alive for 12 years. That seeing you again feels like I can finally breathe properly after drowning. Matthew closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I became sheriff so I could stay in one place. So that if you ever came back, you could find me. I bought land outside of town, built a house with my own 2 hands. I never married. Could not bring myself to, even though half the unmarried women in this territory have tried to catch my attention. Because none of them were you. None of them had your laugh or your stubbornness or the way you used to look at me like I hung the moon. Jane's bags fell from both hands this time, and she did not care. Matthew, I never forgot your face, Jane, not for a single day. He reached up, and this time he did touch her, his calloused fingers gentle as they traced her cheekbone. I used to practice what I would say if I ever saw you again. Sometimes I was angry, told you off for breaking my heart. Sometimes I was cold, pretended I had moved on. But now you are here, and all I want to do is this. He pulled her into his arms, and Jane went willingly, pressing her face against his chest as 12 years of loneliness and longing crashed over her in waves. He held her tight enough to hurt, and she clutched at his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear, might turn out to be another dream that would dissolve when she woke. But he was solid and warm and real, his heart pounding against her ear, his breath stirring her hair. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry, Matthew, I know. His voice rumbled through his chest. I know you are, darling, I know. They stood there in the middle of the street, holding each other while the town moved around them, until Jane became aware of curious stares and whispered conversations. She pulled back reluctantly, wiping at her eyes with shaking hands. I should get to the hotel, get settled. No. Matthew picked up her bags before she could protest. "You are coming home with me. I mean to my house. Not for anything improper," he added quickly, color rising in his cheeks in a way that made him look suddenly young again. "But I have a spare room and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, can act as chaperone. Please, Jane, I just got you back. I cannot let you go to some hotel where I cannot talk to you, cannot be near you." She knew she should refuse, should insist on propriety, but the desperate hope in his eyes demolished any resistance. "All right. Yes, thank you." The walk to Matthew's house on the edge of town was both the longest and shortest of Jane's life. They did not speak, but she was intensely aware of him beside her, the careful distance he maintained so they would not accidentally brush against each other, the way he kept glancing over as if to confirm she had not vanished. The house, when they reached it, took her breath away. It was not large, but it was beautifully built, the wood weathered to a soft gray, with a wide porch and shutters painted deep blue. A garden stretched behind it, improbably green in the desert landscape, and chickens scratched in a tidy coop. "You built this?" She turned to him, amazed. "Took me 4 years, working every spare hour I had." Pride colored his voice. "I wanted to prove your father wrong, wanted to prove I could amount to something, could give you the kind of life you deserved. By the time I finished it, you had been gone 6 years, and I had no idea if you would ever see it, but I kept it up anyway, just in case." The tears threatened again, but Jane swallowed them down. "It is beautiful, Matthew, truly." Mrs. Chen turned out to be a tiny, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who took one look at Jane's tear-stained face and Matthew's dazed expression, and immediately hustled Jane inside with promises of tea and a hot bath. The spare room was small but immaculate, with a quilt on the bed that looked handmade and lace curtains on the window. Jane sank down on the mattress after Mrs. Chen left, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. She was here. She was actually here in Matthew Brennan's house, and he had held her in the street like his life depended on it. He had never married, had built a house with her in mind, had never forgotten her face. The weight of it, the sheer impossible wonder of it, made her light-headed. She bathed and changed into a fresh dress, then sat at the small mirror to pin up her hair with trembling hands. She looked older, she thought critically. There were lines at the corners of her eyes, and her face had lost the softness of youth. What if Matthew had only been reacting to the shock of seeing her? What if, now that the initial emotion had passed, he realized he had built her up in his memory into something she could never be in reality? A knock on the door interrupted her spiral of worry. "Jane, dinner is ready if you are hungry." She took a deep breath and opened the door. Matthew had cleaned up too, changed his shirt and combed his hair, though it still stuck up a little in the back the way it always had. The vulnerability in his expression steadied her. Whatever happened, whatever they had to work through, the emotion between them was real. Dinner was simple but delicious. Beef stew with vegetables from the garden and fresh bread. Mrs. Chen served them, then disappeared tactfully into the kitchen, leaving them alone at the table. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the scrape of spoons against bowls unnaturally loud. "Tell me about your life." Matthew set down his spoon, fixing her with that intense blue gaze. "Tell me everything. I want to know all the years I missed." So Jane told him about St. Louis, gray and cold after the Arizona sunshine. About meeting Charles, who had been patient and kind when her father introduced them at a church social. About the quiet wedding, the small apartment above the pharmacy, the years of helping Charles mix medicines and manage accounts. About her father's death from a heart attack 5 years ago, and how she had nursed Charles through the consumption that finally took him 2 winters past. "It sounds lonely," Matthew said quietly when she finished. It was. Jane met his eyes. I made the best of it. Charles was good to me and I tried to be a good wife to him. But you are right. It was lonely. I always felt like I was playing a part, pretending to be someone I was not, the dutiful daughter, the proper wife. I lost myself somewhere along the way. And now. He reached across the table, his hand palm up in invitation. Who are you now, Jane? She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses, the strength, the way his fingers immediately curled around hers like they belonged there. I am trying to figure that out. I am a widow with some money saved and no ties anywhere. I am a woman who knows she made a mistake and is hoping it is not too late to fix it. I am someone who loved a cowboy turned sheriff and never stopped, even when I should have. Matthew's grip tightened. It is not too late. Christ, Jane, I have loved you for half my life. I would have waited another 12 years if I had to. You should not have had to wait at all. She blinked hard against the tears. I wasted so much time. We both did. Then let us not waste any more. He stood, pulling her up with him, and cupped her face in both hands. I need to kiss you. I have needed to kiss you since the moment I saw you on that street. Tell me you want that too. More than anything, she breathed. His mouth came down on hers, and it was like being struck by lightning, like drowning and being saved all at once. He kissed her with 12 years of longing, deep and desperate, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair. It was nothing like the sweet, fumbling kisses they had shared at 18. This was adult desire, raw and urgent, tempered with the knowledge of loss and the miracle of second chances. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Jane laughed, the sound shaky. We only just found each other again. I do not care. I have waited 12 years. I do not want to wait any more. He pulled back to look at her, his expression fierce. I love you, Jane Vickers. I loved you when you were 18 and I was a ranch hand with nothing to my name. I loved you through every year you were gone. I love you now and I will love you until the day I die. Marry me. Yes. The word came out without hesitation, without doubt. Yes, Matthew. Yes. He kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent, and Jane felt something in her chest that had been locked tight for 12 years finally open. This was right. This was where she was always supposed to end up. They spent the next week in a bubble of rediscovery, learning each other as adults. Matthew showed her around town, introducing her to everyone with obvious pride, his hand possessive at the small of her back. Jane helped him with his paperwork at the sheriff's office, untangling his chaotic filing system and organizing his case notes with the efficiency she had learned managing Charles's pharmacy. In the evenings, they sat on his porch and talked for hours, filling in the gaps, sharing stories and dreams and fears. She learned that he had been shot twice in the line of duty, the scars puckering the skin on his left shoulder and right thigh. He learned that she had lost a baby 3 months into pregnancy 6 years ago, the grief of it compounded by the knowledge that she would likely never have another chance with Charles, whose illness had already begun to weaken him by then. I wanted children, she admitted one night, her voice small. I always imagined having a house full of them, little boys with your eyes, little girls with my stubbornness. We can still have that. Matthew took her hand, threading their fingers together. You are only 30, we have time. Do you want children? She turned to look at him in the gathering dusk. I want everything with you. His voice was steady, certain. Children, grandchildren, a life so full and rich that we forget what it was like to be lonely. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to grow old with you, Jane. They were married 3 weeks after her arrival, in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Jane wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Chen helped her sew, and Matthew wore his best suit, his hair slicked down and his eyes shining. The whole town turned out, curious about the woman who had captured their bachelor sheriff's heart, and Jane found herself welcomed with a warmth that made her throat tight. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a claiming and a healing all at once. Matthew worshipped her body with hands and mouth, erasing the loneliness of 12 years with every touch, every whispered endearment. Jane clung to him, overwhelmed by sensation, by the rightness of finally being with the man she loved. When they came together, it felt like coming home. In the weeks that followed, they settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Jane opened a small shop selling medicines and remedies, using the skills she had learned from her father and Charles, and it quickly became popular. Matthew continued his work as sheriff, keeping the peace in Jerome Junction with a fairness and dedication that made him respected throughout the county. They built a life together, brick by brick, moment by moment. Jane planted roses in the garden, and Matthew built her a workshop where she could dry herbs and mix her remedies. They went riding on Sunday afternoons, galloping through the red rock canyons the way they had when they were young and carefree. They made love with increasing tenderness and familiarity, learning what made each other gasp and sigh. 4 months after their wedding, Jane realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, her heart alternating between hope and fear, before she told Matthew over breakfast one morning, "I think I might be expecting." His coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. "What? Are you certain?" "Not completely, but I have all the signs." She twisted her napkin in her lap. "I am afraid to hope, Matthew. After losing the baby before, I do not know if I can bear it if something goes wrong." He was around the table in an instant, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands. "Then we will hope together. And if something happens, God forbid, we will get through it together. You are not alone anymore, Jane. You will never be alone again." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to Jane's relief and Matthew's obvious delight. He became absurdly protective, fussing over her until she threatened to hit him with a broom if he did not stop trying to carry her everywhere. But his joy was infectious, and she found herself believing, slowly, that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, she would get to hold her baby in her arms. On a cool February morning in 1886, after 16 hours of labor, Jane gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Matthew was there through all of it, holding her hand and wiping her brow, and when the doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, she watched tears stream down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Matthew whispered, touching the baby's tiny fist with one finger. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Jane looked down at her son, at his red face and shock of dark hair, and felt love so overwhelming it stole her breath. "James. James Matthew Brennan. James." Matthew tested the name, then leaned in to kiss her forehead. "Thank you, Jane. Thank you for coming back to me. Thank you for giving me everything I ever wanted." James proved to be an easy baby, quick to smile and slow to cry, and Jane took to motherhood with a fierce protectiveness that surprised her. Matthew was a devoted father, coming home on his lunch breaks to hold his son, singing off key lullabies that made Jane laugh until her sides hurt. They were happy, deliriously so, and sometimes Jane had to pinch herself to believe it was real. When James was 8 months old, trouble came to Jerome Junction in the form of a gang of outlaws passing through. They robbed the bank in broad daylight, shooting the clerk and wounding 2 bystanders. Matthew rallied a posse and went after them, and Jane spent 3 agonizing days waiting for news, holding James close and praying harder than she ever had in her life. He came back dirty and exhausted but unharmed, with all 5 outlaws in custody. Jane burst into tears at the sight of him, and he held her tight while she shook, whispering reassurances into her hair. "I am all right, darling. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. I cannot lose you," she sobbed against his chest. "Not now. Not after everything it took for us to find our way back to each other. You will not lose me." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I promise you, Jane. I am too stubborn to die. I have a wife and son who need me and a whole life ahead of us. I am not going anywhere." He kept that promise. Over the next few years, he trained a deputy to handle more of the dangerous work, and gradually transitioned into a role that was more administrative than active. When James turned 3, Jane found herself pregnant again, and this time, she carried a daughter who looked so much like Matthew it made her ache. They named her Sarah Catherine, and she was born with her father's blue eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. The years passed in a blur of happiness. James grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere. And Sarah became a wild child who climbed trees and caught lizards and drove her mother to distraction. Matthew eventually retired as sheriff at 45, passing the badge to his well-trained deputy, and focused on expanding their ranch, breeding horses that became sought after throughout the territory. Jane's shop continued to thrive, and she trained 2 apprentices to help her manage the workload. She became known throughout the county for her skill, and people traveled from miles away to seek her remedies. But her greatest pride remained her family, the life she and Matthew had built together against all odds. On their 10th anniversary, Matthew took her riding to a spot in the red rock canyons they had always loved, where a natural spring created a tiny oasis of green. They dismounted and sat by the water, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "You have any regrets?" he asked quietly. "About how things turned out?" Jane thought about it seriously. "I regret the years we lost. But I do not regret the journey that brought me back to you. Those years made me who I am. They taught me what I wanted, what mattered, and they made me appreciate what we have even more. I love you, Jane Brennan." He kissed the top of her head. "I loved you at 18. I loved you through 12 years of waiting. I love you now at 43 with your gray hairs and your stubborn chin and the way you hum while you work. I will love you at 80 if God grants us that long." "I love you too," she whispered. "I never stopped. Even when I thought I would never see you again. I never stopped loving you, Matthew." They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson, and Jane thought about the girl she had been at 18, heartbroken and lost. That girl could never have imagined this, the depth of happiness possible, the way love could grow and deepen and strengthen with time. She had thought, all those years ago, that leaving Matthew was the end of her story, but it had only been the beginning. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of a life well lived. James, at 15, announced his intention to become a lawman like his father, and Matthew spent hours training him in tracking, shooting, and the art of reading people. Sarah, at 12, showed no interest in traditionally feminine pursuits, preferring to help her mother in the workshop, learning the properties of herbs and the chemistry of medicine with an aptitude that astonished them both. "She is going to be a doctor," Jane said one evening, watching through the window as Sarah carefully ground dried sage in a mortar. "I can feel it. She has the mind for it." "The world is changing," Matthew agreed. "Maybe by the time she is grown, it will not seem so impossible for a woman to study medicine." In 1896, when Jane was 44 and Matthew was 47, Arizona was moving steadily toward statehood, and Jerome Junction had grown from a rough mining town into a prosperous community. They threw a party for their 15th anniversary, and the whole town came, spilling out of their house and into the yard, eating Mrs. Chen's cooking and dancing to fiddle music under the stars. Jane stood on the porch, watching Matthew spin Sarah around the makeshift dance floor, her daughter laughing with pure joy, and felt a hand slip into hers. James, now 17 and towering over her, squeezed gently. "You and Pa are disgusting, you know," he said, but he was grinning. "The way you still look at each other like you are newlyweds. It is embarrassing." "Just you wait," Jane told him. "Someday you will meet a girl who makes you feel like the whole world has tilted on its axis, and then you will understand. If I am half as happy as you and Pa, I will count myself lucky." He kissed her cheek and headed off to join the dancing, and Jane's throat tightened with emotion. Matthew appeared at her elbow a moment later, slightly out of breath and grinning. "Dance with me, wife. You just danced with Sarah. Are you trying to prove you are still young? I am trying to hold the most beautiful woman at this party." He pulled her into his arms, swaying to the music. "Have I told you lately that you are stunning, this morning, and yesterday, and the day before that?" But she smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "You can tell me again, though. I do not think I will ever get tired of hearing it." They danced slowly, ignoring the faster tempo of the music, lost in their own world. Around them, friends and neighbors celebrated, but Jane was only aware of Matthew, the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for 15 years. "I used to dream about this," Matthew murmured against her hair. "When you were gone, I would lie awake and imagine what it would be like if you came back, if we got a second chance. But my imagination was not good enough. Reality is so much better than anything I could have dreamed." "We are lucky," Jane whispered. "So many people never get this. Never find the person who makes them whole. We found each other twice." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes soft in the lantern light. "Once when we were too young and foolish to make it work, and again when we were old enough to know how rare this is, how precious. We are not just lucky, Jane. We are blessed." As the years advanced, they watched their children grow into remarkable adults. James became a deputy in Tucson, earning a reputation for fairness and courage. Sarah, defying all conventions, went east to study medicine at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, the first woman from Jerome Junction to pursue such a path. They wrote letters home full of their adventures and achievements, and Jane and Matthew read them aloud to each other, bursting with pride. They also weathered sorrows together. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at 71, and they mourned the woman who had been witness to their reunion, who had kept their house running for so many years. They held each other through the grief, grateful for the time they had been given with her. Matthew's mother, who had abandoned him as a child, appeared suddenly one year, old and destitute, begging for help. After a long conversation, they took her in, and Jane watched her husband care for the woman who had failed him, offering forgiveness and grace that humbled her. His mother lived with them for 2 years before she died, and though the relationship remained complicated, Matthew made his peace with his past. On a warm spring evening in 1903, when Jane was 51 and Matthew was 54, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. James was married now, to a spirited schoolteacher who gave as good as she got, and they had blessed Jane and Matthew with 2 grandchildren. Sarah was finishing her medical training and planned to return to Arizona to open a practice. Life had been generous beyond measure. "Do you remember the day I saw you again?" Matthew asked suddenly. "Standing there on the street with your bags, looking scared and hopeful all at once." "I remember everything about that day." Jane smiled. "I remember thinking you were even more handsome than you had been at 21. I remember the way you said my name like it hurt. I remember being terrified that too much time had passed, that we had missed our chance. I was terrified too. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles in the familiar way that still made her heart flutter. But the moment I held you, I knew. Some things are meant to be, Jane. You and I, we were always meant to find our way back to each other. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not come back, if I had chosen to stay in St. Louis or gone somewhere else? Matthew was quiet for a moment, considering. I think I would have kept waiting, kept hoping. I could not have moved on, could not have married someone else. You had my heart, and there was no getting it back. I am glad I came back. Jane leaned her head on his shoulder. I am glad I was brave enough to return to the one place I had been happy, even though I did not know if you would still be here. It was the best decision I ever made. Second best, Matthew corrected with a smile in his voice. The best decision you ever made was saying yes when I proposed 3 weeks after you showed up. That was not a decision. That was inevitability. She tilted her face up to his. You are my destiny, Matthew Brennan. You always have been. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 33 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they broke apart, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with purple and gold. In the years that followed, they transitioned gracefully into the role of elders in their community. Matthew served on the town council, helping guide Jerome Junction's development with wisdom earned from decades of service. Jane became a mentor to young women interested in healing arts, teaching them everything she knew, determined to pass on her knowledge before it was too late. James became sheriff of Tucson, and they visited often, delighting in their grandchildren, who adored their grandfather's stories and their grandmother's cookies. Sarah opened her practice in Phoenix and quickly became one of the most respected doctors in the territory, treating patients of all backgrounds with equal skill and compassion. On their 30th anniversary in 1911, when Jane was 59 and Matthew was 62, their children and grandchildren gathered for a massive celebration. The house and yard overflowed with people, 3 generations united in joy. James raised a glass and toasted his parents, speaking of their love story, how they had found each other twice and built a life that had become legendary in the family. To Ma and Pa, he said, his voice thick with emotion, who taught us that true love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in even when the odds seem impossible. May we all be so lucky as to find what they have. To Jane and Matthew, the crowd echoed, and Jane felt tears slip down her cheeks. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, fingers intertwined. 30 years, Matthew mused. 42 if you count the 2 years before you left. Most of my life I have loved you. All of my life, Jane countered. Because even when I was trying to be happy with Charles, even when I thought I had moved on, part of me was always yours, always waiting to come home to you. Do you think we will get another 30 years? His voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way he only allowed himself to be with her. I do not know, she answered honestly. But however much time we have, I will spend every moment grateful for it, grateful for you, for us, for the miracle of second chances. I love you, Jane, more today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. I love you too, Matthew, always. They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, the way they had for 30 years, and would for however many years remained. The desert wind whispered through the mesquite trees outside their window, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust and home. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a lonesome sound that was answered almost immediately. Jane thought drowsily about how fitting that was, how even the wildest creatures knew the value of finding their match, their partner, their other half. She had been lost once, adrift in a life that was not quite right, not quite hers. But she had found her way back to the man who made her complete, who saw her truly, who loved her fiercely. It had taken 12 years of separation, but those years had taught her the value of what they had. Some loves were worth any weight, any sacrifice. And as sleep claimed her, Jane Brennan smiled, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the cowboy who had never forgotten her face, who had built a house and a life and a future on the foundation of hope and stubborn, enduring love. Their story was not conventional, not simple, but it was theirs, and it was beautiful. The last thing she heard before dreams took her was Matthew's breathing, steady and strong beside her, a rhythm she knew as well as her own heartbeat. It was the sound of home, of safety, of a love that had weathered 12 years of separation and 30 years of togetherness, and would continue to weather whatever challenges remained. They had found each other in the dust and heat of the Arizona territory, two young people with nothing but dreams. They had lost each other to circumstance and youth and poor choices, and they had found each other again, older and wiser and ready to claim the happiness they deserved. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West they called home, full of drama and hardship and impossible odds. But more than that, it was a testament to the power of a love so strong that time and distance could not diminish it, could not erase it, could not make it anything less than what it was: eternal, unbreakable, true. In the quiet of that Arizona night, with the stars bright overhead and the desert vast around them, Jane and Matthew Brennan slept peacefully. Two halves of a whole finally and forever united, living proof that some loves are written in the stars, and some faces are impossible to forget no matter how many years may pass. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a promise kept. And in the morning they would wake to another day of the life they had built together, another day to be grateful for, another day to love each other with the fierce devotion that had become their trademark. It was everything they had ever wanted, everything they had dreamed of during those long years apart. It was home. It was happiness. It was love. And it was theirs forever and always until the end of their days and beyond.